Okay, so I'm going to stop you here. Make sure you've posted your answers to Blackboard. So it's lesson 1 of COMP1006, September 2018. And we're just kind of doing a little introduction to PHP. We've got our live stream started. So this will be in our YouTube playlist. The name. All right, so let's see what we found out so far. I'm not going to read over everything because you guys have the answers here. I just want to touch on some of the important stuff. So we talked about, that PHP has these kind of constructs like Java and other C languages. So we'll see curly brackets, we'll see semicolons. Okay. One of the interesting things about PHP is if we write 3 lines of code and each one of them needs a semicolon, so we have lines 1, 2, and 3. If we leave the semicolon out after line 2, the PHP interpreter, when it generates an error, it's actually going to tell us the error is on line 3. Why, if we leave out a semicolon on line 2, why wouldn't it say the error is on line 2? Why would it tell us the error is on the next line? Yeah, you're on the right track, because without a semicolon, the PHP interpreter thinks the commands on line 2 and 3 is one command together, and then it will crash. So it actually says the error is on line 3, but the issue is we never finished the command on line 2. We're all going to do it. I'm still going to do it. There's no question we're all going to leave out semicolon. So that's always our first clue when we look at the line number. We see the error of our PHP error, go and look and see, did we miss a semicolon on the line above? That's often the cause of our error. So these are some of the most popular sites that use PHP. YouTube uses as well. Here's a couple important facts. So one of the reasons we use PHP is that it's platform independent, right? We'll run on Linux, we'll run on a Mac, it will run on Windows, we'll run on anything, which is one of the reasons for its popularity. One of the other reasons is that it's open source, right? So there's no software, there's no licensing costs. All you need is a text editor. You can build apps with PHP using Notepad if you wanted to. I don't recommend it, but you could. So it works with any kind of web server. This is also important. We're going to type these a lot. So these are PHP script tags. So any of our PHP code in a web page has to be enclosed in these tags, or else it just gets interpreted as HTML and displayed in our browser. And if that's sensitive code, we want to make sure that code doesn't get displayed in our browser. So to show you what this might look like, we'll just pull up a file from a previous class. Let's look at this one. So a PHP file might look something like this. So we're going to have some HTML tags, as well as we can see the opening and closing PHP script tags. So all of the PHP code goes inside of those tags. We can have many of these blocks on a page, actually, if we open it. So here we can see we've got a block of PHP code at the top, and then a bunch of HTML content, another PHP block, etc. So our code kind of gets mashed together. It's not very good from a structure and formatting point of view. Later on, when we work with ASP.NET or Node.js, they're much better in terms of kind of separating our HTML and our server-side code. PHP is a little bit messy. Right. So yeah, it's extendable. We said it's platform independent. It's a basic language. PHP is probably the easiest web programming language to use. That's why we're doing it first before we move into ASP.NET and Node.js. PHP is a good place to start. This is another important point. Basically, every file we create in this class will have a .php extension. Without that extension, our code isn't going to run. So if we write HTML code, we write PHP code like this, but we save it in a file with an HTML or HTML extension, that PHP code is not going to execute. So we need that PHP extension. We're not going to create any files with HTML or HTML extensions. Even if we have a file that's only HTML in this class, we're still going to give it a .php extension, just in case we want to add PHP code in a later lesson. We don't want to have to go back, change our links, and change our file names. So that .php is pretty important. We said it was free. It is low maintenance, absolutely. Performance has certainly gotten better. PHP is now on version 7. For some reason, there was no version 6. And from version 5 to version 7, the performance is much better. So PHP sites run much faster than they used to, which is good. It certainly is flexible, has a huge community. This is an important syntax rules. Whenever you see a word starting with a $sign in PHP, that means it's a variable. That's your key. And actually, we'll talk a bit more about, come back to variables in a minute. Yeah, all these things are true. We've talked a lot about them. PHP is also pretty much only used for web. So unlike Java or C#, where we might write a desktop app, a web app, or a mobile app, PHP we're really not going to see anywhere else other than web applications. You're not going to write a desktop or mobile application in PHP. PHP does have objects, it's not as fully developed as in a language like Java. Okay, so many people saying the same kinds of things. So it's similar to C. It is efficient. Yep, there's ways to secure it for sure. All right, so these are some good notes. So I'll leave this thread here. So you've got that, and there'll probably be a few questions on our first quiz and on our midterm where you can go here and look up the answers, right? These are the base things that probably pretty soon are going to become very evident once we start using PHP. There was one thing here I just want to talk a bit more about. One other thing somebody may even want to add to their thread, add to this thread, and that has to do two other kind of things. One to do with variables and one with the language. One is that PHP, keep in mind, PHP is case sensitive, just like Java, okay? So for example, we can have a variable like this and another one like this. Your PHP interpreter considers those completely separate things, right? One in camel case, one in all lowercase. So we need to be careful. So it doesn't matter which format you use, whether you use camel case, and probably that's what you were taught or used to using in Java. That's pretty common among Java. Or whether you use all lowercase and underscores, but you want to be consistent in your coding style, right? So you don't create a variable in camel case and then try to refer to the same variable all lowercase later. So you'll have to be mindful of case sensitivity in PHP, just like you are in Java. The other thing I want to point out about PHP is PHP is loosely typed. Anybody know what's the difference between a loosely typed programming language and a strongly typed programming language? So Java is strongly typed. PHP is loosely typed. What does that mean? Has to do with how we create and use variables.
The type of variable is getting created by itself, like we are selecting an integer or if we are selecting a float or something. So in Java, we have to declare int x.
Right, exactly, right? So let's say we want a variable in Java called age, right? We would declare it, we'd say it's an int. What would happen if we type this in Java? What's going to happen when we try to compile our code? Right, it's going to give an error. What kind of error is it going to be? Yeah, it's a data type error, right? This value cannot possibly be assigned to that variable which holds an integer. So that's a strongly typed language. Every variable must have a data type, and it can only hold appropriate values for that data type. Right? You guys learned this back in programming fundamentals. Pretty simple, pretty basic programming concept. So if this is a strongly typed language, PHP is loosely typed. So we create a variable this way. Maybe in PHP I do this. what will happen in PHP if I then try to output or display the value of my age variable? There's three options. We could get nothing. We could get an error. I guess four options. We could get 30 or we could get ABC. What do you think the value would be displayed in a loosely typed language? Do you think ABC? Okay. Any other opinions? What will the value of age be? You think ABC? Yeah, that's right. So a loosely typed language, a variable is just an empty container. There's no type. So in PHP, we can write that code like I have on line 5 and 6. If I display it, it'll say ABC. So this is a good news, bad news situation, right? The good news is we get fewer errors. The bad news is the loosely typed nature allows us to put values into variables that maybe we don't want, right? So it's easier for things to kind of go in the wrong direction. Now, PHP has some notion of types, but really only when we're passing variables as when we're using parameters in a function. Then we have a way of typing them. But when we're just using general variables, PHP is loosely typed. So we have to be careful because we'll get bad data. So we have to do some extra checking because we don't have a compiler here like we would in Java or C# that will prevent this from happening. I guarantee you there are some questions on your midterm test about this, about strongly typed and loosely typed. Does that make sense what the difference is? Okay. This is much harder to explain to students who've never learned Java before. But you guys know. So when we create variables in PHP, we'll simply do this and we can assign a value. There's no notion of data type when it comes to creating our variables. Okay. So you may want to add, if anyone wants to add a little note in the thread, that's fine. You can edit your response or do another reply just explaining that it's loosely typed and what that means. So you'll all have that note for a reference later. Okay. I want to go here. Some other good news for you. I'm not going to go through this whole thing, just the relevant part. For many people, the whole notion of a web application and all things we can do online seems kind of magical. Hey, I can go on my phone or I go on my computer and I can find any information I want. I can buy stuff, I can sign up for stuff. Heck, I could even take a whole diploma or degree online, right? All through my browser. The good news is, so people think this is actually really complicated, but the fundamentals we learn in this class will allow you to build almost any kind of web application anybody ever asks you to build. They all actually work the same way. The fundamentals are actually pretty simple. So, and the good news is we want everyone out there in the world to think this is some kind of magic because that means they will pay us to build websites for them. Really not all that hard to do. So what are the basics? How does this work? Basically, all a web application does is allow people to work with data in some kind of browser. That's it. It allows us to view, add, edit, and delete information using web browser. The HTML is just used for the presentation. The data lives in a database somewhere. All of you guys are taking a relational database course this semester, I assume. Who's the teacher for that one? Who's your database professor? Okay. So the things you learn in that class work together with the things you learn in this class. Because in this class, all the information we're working with, displaying and capturing our web application, it's got to live somewhere. Where does it live? Well, it lives in a database. So what kind of data? Let's think about this. So if we could look at Facebook database, all Facebook is really is showing us a collection of different data. If we were able to look at Facebook's database, what are the different things we would see in there? What are the different sections or tables or buckets in the Facebook database? What information does Facebook store? Profiles, pictures, comments, Games, posts, friend list. Yeah, likes. Right? So all Facebook is just a browser letting you see this collection of data, right, that we're adding to. So there, that was my list. You guys did pretty good. You mentioned a few things I didn't. Right? So the Facebook database are just lists of these things, and the web application or the mobile app, it's just a way for you to add, edit, or view that information. Nothing else. What about a web application like Amazon? What are some of the different tables we would see if we could look in the Amazon database? Products. Right? Yep. So user logins, customer profiles. Yeah, that's the most important, right? That's why they're in business, right? They want data added to the transactions. They want us to buy stuff. Yep, reviews and ratings would be there. Right, so categories, reviews, shipping, you name most of the important ones. So all Amazon is a way for us to create, view, and modify that information. Same thing. Right? What about this website? So Canada's biggest newspaper. If we could look in the Globe and Mail database, what would those tables be? What will we find in there? Ads. Yep. Pictures, videos, media. What's the main content? Why does somebody look at the Globe and Mail website? Yeah, news articles probably most important. Yep. Yep. Links to other. So we probably have this. So articles would probably be the most important, the actual content of the newspaper, but then some of the related stuff, the media, the comments, the advertisers, the writers, and then the different categories, right? I'm interested in the entertainment. I'm interested in sports. I'm interested in business, interested in politics, right? So all that stuff. So again, all the website is a way for us to look up the information in here we're interested in. That's all it is. So all of these sites, they all work the exact same way. So I kind of like to think of it like this. It's a little bit like going to a pub when you go to a web application. It actually works kind of similar. I think this is a useful analogy. So if you go to a pub with your friends, you want to get some drinks, right? There's a bit of a process involved, right? You can't just walk into the pub, go behind the bar, take what you want and leave. So it's kind of like that with a web application. When somebody comes to Facebook or comes to Amazon or comes to Globe and Mail, we've got to have a process for how do we give somebody what they want, right? I want to look up Jill's profile. So how does Facebook work? So when I click on his name, it gives me the information I want to see. So if we think about it, the database that holds the information you're interested in, that's kind of like the bar, right? The bar's got all the drinks we want. But we don't want everything. When we go with our friends, we only want certain drinks. When I go to Facebook and I click on a profile, I only want that information. I go to Amazon and I click on a book, I'm interested in that information only. I don't want everything, right? So we need some way of figuring out when someone clicks on a link or goes to a particular page on a website, how do we know what information they want? So in each case, users can't just go wherever they want. Right? We can't go into Facebook's database and take the information. We wouldn't even know where to find it. Just like in the bar, we can't go behind the bar and grab any bottle we want. So there's our analogy. The bar is like our database, and we've got individual tables. So those individual lists of information that somebody might want to see. So what happens in the bar? You go to the pub with your friends. What's the first thing that happens for you to be able, everybody to be able to get the drink they want? Yeah, to who? Okay, so it could be to the bartender, Or it could be server comes to your table, right? And they say, what would you like? And they take note of what everybody wants. So in a web application, how do users tell us what information they want? Right? They come to Facebook or the Globe and Mail that have huge, massive, hundreds of gigabyte, terabyte databases. How does a user tell us what they're looking for? There's usually a few ways they can do it. Yeah, they make an HTTP request, and how could they make the request? There's a few different ways they could do it. If I go, what'll happen when I hit enter? Right, so just typing an address is one way of making a request, right? I'm requesting the home page here. What's the most, that's probably the second most common. What's the most common way? So in here, now I'm on the site. What's the most common way for me to tell the Globe and Mail's web server what I want to see? Right, I click something. So when I click sports, I'm making a particular request. Don't show me the home page. Don't show me Drive or Arts or Life. Show me the sports homepage. So I'm making a request here, much like telling this guy what I want from behind the bar. Right? Same thing. So now, what does the bartender do? So all of us, we go out for a drink. The server comes, takes everybody's order. What happens next? After we've given the server our request, what does he or she do? Okay, yes, but how do they do it? Where do they go? Yeah, they go to the bar where all the drinks are, right? So that's kind of what's happening here. We click a link, the server interprets our request, it looks up that page, and then it's got to go find everything that should come back on that page, right? When I click sports, it's got to go into the Globe and Mail database and notice every article here is about sports, and they're all current. So that's the equivalent of the server will basically take our order, right? They're going to write down, or if they have a good memory, they can remember everyone's order. It's kind of a set of instructions, right? Who do they give that set of instructions to? Yeah, to the bartender. The bartender stands behind the bar, and they'll take those instructions and they'll make everyone's drink. So in a web application, a server uses a notepad for the instructions. In a web application, we're going to use the SQL language, which is what you're going to learn in your database class. That's the set of instructions. That's how we tell the database what information we want. So in this case, we want all of the articles in the sports category that are from today. That's what's loading on this page, right? So that's what that SQL command, that instruction is asking for. If I click one, I'm making another instruction, show me this particular article, not the rest, right? And that's how the information gets here so I can read what I want to read. So we have our instructions. Server takes those instructions to the bar. The bartender gives the server all the drinks we ordered. And the server comes back with everybody's drink and distributes it. That's all that happens here. I click on a Facebook photo gallery. It sends the ID of that gallery to the Facebook database. Facebook retrieves all those images and uses HTML to display them all. So I can see, you know, what Tyler was doing on the weekend. He had a good time and he posted some photos. So all of these sites, every application, not just Facebook, Amazon, the Globe and Mail, every web application you go to every day, it works the exact same way. What's the first website you look at every day? Okay, you go to the college site, or we go to Google. Now, Google doesn't actually show anything right away, so what do we do in Google? Right? We make some kind of request. We tell the bartender what we want. You know. Look at Facebook in a second, right? So it uses my request to go and fetch information related to that request. If I go to Facebook, I'm asking for this particular profile by having this. If I change this, I'm actually loading the same page. There isn't a Georgian College.html file and a Seneca College.html file and a Kartik.html file, right? It's the same page called profile. And depending on which link I click or what I type in the address bar, I get a different profile. Right? Just changing the request so Facebook knows to look up something different each time. So notice when I go from one profile to the next, actually, I'll just log in for a second, make it a little easier. So let me go back to Georgian. I load two different profiles. How much of the content is the same and how much of the content is different when I go from one profile to another? So here's Georgian. So if I toggle back and forth between these two, how much of the profile is, how much of the page is the same and how much is different? Yeah. Same layout. So really the only things that are the same are the layout, the navigation bar, and eventually the little footer, right? As well as my friend list here is the same because that's related to me, right? But if you log in and go to the same page, your right side is different than mine, right? Because it shows your friend list, not mine. So almost every web application we go to is like this. The top, the header and footer are the same, and everything else in the middle, absolutely everything, is being selected from a database. If we look at, and I'll go to two different articles on the Globe and Mail site. So there's one, and here's two. Right, we're going to see the same header. The same header at the top, although it does show my username. Same footer down at the bottom. But everything else is different. We get different articles, different pictures. So probably 95% of every web application we look at, the content is dynamically being selected from a database, depending on what the user's asked to see. If we go to Amazon, it's going to be the same. Header at the top. They change a few things here, depending on the time of year. Footer at the bottom with all the links and legal stuff, and everything in the middle is dynamic. So that's what I mean. There really aren't 30 different kinds of web applications. There's only one kind. So as long as we can build one, we can build any of this stuff. Okay. So we'll kind of refer to these three sites often because they're popular sites. Probably most or all of you have been on all of them. But I mean, the fact that these sites are dynamic, that's why you keep coming back, right? If the content didn't get updated constantly, you wouldn't check it 10 times a day. You check it because you hope every time I come back, there's something new for me to see. So on Facebook, we as the users, not only do we review the content, but we provide all the content. Facebook doesn't provide any content for us, really. It's all provided by the users, and that's why we come, to see our friends' content. On a site like this one, well, it's the newspaper that provides most of the content. But we can provide other content. For example, if we want to make a comment on a story. So the newspaper provides the article, but then users can give their own feedback and generate a discussion based on the content. Which is why I prefer to read the newspaper online. Sometimes the comments are more interesting than the articles themselves. So this is our focus. We want to build in this class really simple version of this. A web application where we can view, create, edit, and delete any kind of data, and then make it secure by requiring people to register and log in order to access it. So we'll build one database, which we'll sort of build together, and then we'll continually build this site out over the term. So I need to do a quick poll. Now let's see. Okay, we'll do a little poll here. So I think I showed you 2 years ago, the class decided to build a beer store where we could add, list, edit, and delete beers. The class voted. I always, rather than me decide, I would rather you decide so that we can build an application that's about something that interests you. So maybe I'll ask you for 4 or 5 choices. I'll put them up here on this poll, and then you guys can have a quick vote. Okay. So any suggestions about what our website should be about? Where we can view, add, edit, and delete information. Beer stores, I've had movie databases, I've had book library. Every class usually picks something different. Okay, so we could have like places. Okay, that's one option. Any other suggestions? What you'd like our website to be about? What do you want to build? Sorry? Gadgets, okay. That'd be an option. Any other suggestions? Okay. Well, that would sort of, I guess, be similar. So we're talking about technology devices? Okay. Or did you mean something different? Okay. Okay. That's usually a popular one. Okay, we could do restaurants. I've done that before, actually, as a final exam. Students had to build a restaurant website with a list of restaurants and the menus and addresses and stuff. Okay, so here's what I want you to do. So the poll is active. So if you go on Blackboard, in lesson 1, there's a link right here. It says planning our in-class web app. If you click this link, it should take you to pollev.com/richfreeman521, and you can vote. I think you're allowed to vote once. So click the link. So the poll should be available. You don't have to put your name in. You can vote anonymously. And just click on what you want our website to be about. And then we'll look at the results. And poll everywhere is cool. It will update in real time. Yes, I know it's fun to make the lines go up and down. So how many of us are here? 4, 8, 10, 16. So I count there are 30 of us in the room, so we should get 30 votes. Well, I didn't put it up on the list. You could always do that for an assignment. Okay, if you haven't voted, be sure you vote. I'll give you 30 more seconds to make your final vote. If you're having a really hard time, you know, it's really critical. Okay. I had 30 responses a minute ago. Okay. So we have 30 responses. All right, so we'll kind of build our own version of, almost our own version of Yelp. Right, for those, we'll make a list of restaurants is what we'll track. So we'll be able to have restaurant, for example, name, address, type of food, location, maybe a 5-star rating, picture. So our application will be about, we want to be able to add new restaurants in, to view the list, to modify or delete a restaurant, later be able to upload photos and things like that, as well as be able to register, log in, maybe see a Google map to the location. Okay. All right. Okay, so we have a little bit of time left. So the last thing I want to do, while we still have a bit of time, is let's try just creating a couple really simple PHP pages and then see if we can get them up on the web server, okay? So I did send out instructions about software and how to connect to the web server. If you've ignored those instructions, you'll want to go and look at those announcements or those emails and make sure you've installed everything and configured things properly before next week's class. Okay? In terms of writing the code for today, well, all you really need is Notepad if you don't even have a text editor. So in terms of the tools, so you can use any kind of code editor. But as I mentioned in my second announcement, these are probably the two most popular code editors for PHP development. There's Visual Studio Code, which is free from Microsoft, and there's PHP Storm, which is from JetBrains. Now, normally, most people have to pay for PHP Storm. They give it to you free for 30 days. But as a student, if you register your copy and say you're a student, they will give you a license for 365 days, and you can renew it every year as long as you're a student. Okay? So I'm using PHP Storm by JetBrains. If you have neither of these for right now, you can use any text editor at all, even Notepad. So I'm going to start up PHP Storm. So you don't have to have this program for today. And if you prefer Visual Studio Code or another editor, that's fine. Doesn't really matter. This is my preferred editor. The other thing that I would recommend you install, which I mentioned in my first announcement, is you should install a local web server. There are several, they're all free, but I suggest installing Zamp Server, which is available here from apachefriends.org. This will run on any operating systems. You can install it on Windows, Linux, or Mac. It also includes the MySQL server. So you can run a local database, which you'll need for this class. You'll also need it for your relational database class. So this is free. So we're going to use 2 web servers in class. As I'm working in class and building out the restaurant site, I'm going to use my local server. Why? Because it means every time I want to make a change to a web page, I just have to hit save and refresh. For your assignments, we're going to want all of your code needs to go on a live production web server. And for that, we have accounts for you on Amazon Web Services. So you should have gotten an email that has your AWS credentials. And there's instructions on Blackboard, although I'll walk through them with you as well, how to connect to AWS and how to deploy your PHP pages to the web server. Okay? So in class, you'll want to use localhost. It's faster. For your assignments, you'll want to use AWS. So when you install Zamp, what it does is it creates this directory. So on Windows, it'll create a Zamp directory for you. And in here, there's a whole bunch of stuff. The directory we're mostly interested in is the htdocs. This is where we actually put our web pages to run. Now to start your Zamp server, just turn this off. Once you have it installed, if you don't have it installed today, it's not critical. But if you do, I'm going to show you how to start the server. You just open up the Zamp control panel. Now mine already says my Apache, so Apache is the web server. So mine is already running. If you open up Zamp and it says start, it means your server's offline. So all you need to do to start the server is click the start button beside Apache. Now the default port for your local server is port 80. So you normally access it through port 80. That's the default for HTTP. I have another server already running on port 80. So when I installed Zamp, I told it to install on port 800 instead. So when I access my server, I have to go to localhost :800. You won't have to do that if you just install it on the default. You won't need to. So inside of my htdocs folder, I've got a folder here called COMP1006. So I'm going to put all of my files that I make in our course inside of here. And I'm going to make one other folder here because I have stuff from previous classes. You're only going to take this class once and only once because everyone's going to do well and pass. So, but I'm going to make a folder for this semester, which I'll just call F2018. You don't need this folder. This is just to organize my files. Okay. So now I'm going to open up this directory in my PHP Storm code editor, and we'll write a couple of simple PHP files and try to execute them. So I'm going to open up that directory in PHP Storm. So I'm going to go to my htdocs and open up the folder I just created for this class. So I'll make a new folder for each week. I'll have a lesson 1, lesson 2, etc. for week 1, week 2. So here's my folder. I have nothing here. So I'm going to right click my folder here and click new, and I want to create a new PHP file. So I'm going to call this one PHP Info. I don't have to give it an extension. It lets me choose the extension automatically. So it writes comments in here. I think I just need to make my font a little bigger. Yeah, you can create a project or you can just open a directory. I created the folder in Windows and then I just opened the directory. Or you can make a new project, either one. It's fine. Just trying to make my font a little bigger here. No, not specifically. Do you have Zamp installed? Okay, they're two separate things. Zamp is the server, and PHP Storm is the code editor. So we're going to write our code here, but in order to run it, we'll want to install. That's our local host web server. I'm just trying to find a way because I see my code here is too small. Ah, there we go. Okay, is that better? Can you read that or do you need it bigger? Okay? All right. This is one of the other ways I've actually caught students submitting each other's work. When you use PHP Storm, it automatically puts your username in the comments. I've had students not change the username and give me an assignment. Okay. So we're not actually going to put, so for this, if PHP Storm has code hinting, we're going to call this function called PHP Info. And then we'll just terminate it, obviously with a semicolon. One line of PHP code. So I'll save my file, and notice the path, it's inside of my Zamp htdocs directory. So now what I want to do is run this file, look at this file in the browser and see what happens. So we'll go to my browser and close some of these. So if you have Zamp running, you can probably just go to your local host. I have to go to my local host 800 because my Zamp runs on port 800 instead. So if I do that, it takes me here to like the Zamp homepage, but I don't want this. I want the page we just created. So instead, if I go to my COMP1006 folder, here's my fall 2018 folder I just created. And here's my PHP info file. If I open it up, that one little function, PHP info, what it does is it gives us a whole bunch of information about the server environment. Right? Tells us what kind of server we're running on. What versions of things we've got, what the path is. et cetera, et cetera. So that function generates all of this HTML for us, right? We didn't type any of this. Calling that function does all of this for us. Now we could add some HTML in here. I know we probably should have proper HTML tags. We don't. So if I just put in a HTML outside of my PHP tag, we should get this message showing up now above all of the content that our PHP function generated. Go back and refresh. So I have HTML that we added at the top. So all of our PHP pages are going to be a combination of HTML, static HTML text, and dynamic PHP content. Right? That's what Facebook is. Static HTML text at the top and bottom. And then all this dynamic content being generated by PHP in the middle. So this is how I run the file locally. Now I'm going to show you the importance of why we need the Zamp server here. I'll go over to my directory here. Here's my file. If I'm going to try and open my file directly in my browser. So I'll pick Firefox and say, open the file in my browser. Notice the difference here. I'm opening the same file. How come my message is here? Where's the rest of the content? When I open it this way, we get my little HTML message at the top, but then we get all this content below. How come when I opened it in the browser, we only get the first line? Right, okay, that's right. So where does the PHP code execute? Right. This is one of the most fundamental things to understand about web programming. Okay? PHP is a server-side scripting technology. Right? We don't see here, if we view the source of the page, and I do a find and look for our PHP Info function. Right? That code doesn't exist. It lives only on the server. Doesn't get sent to the browser. Only the output of that function gets sent to the browser. So in order for our PHP code to run, we must execute it from a web server. If we don't use the web server, we can load the page, but our PHP code just gets ignored. It doesn't actually execute. So that's why we need Zamp. Zamp is our local host server. So we can build the files with PHP Storm, but we can't execute the code without having a web server. It's not like JavaScript. JavaScript runs in your browser. We don't need a web server to run JavaScript code, but we need a web server to run PHP or ASP.NET or any other server-side technology. So we install a program like Zamp that gives us a local server to execute the PHP code. Otherwise, the browser just doesn't know what to do with PHP. It can't interpret it, can't make sense of it. And as it's Avunk, did I get your name right? Okay. It also hides our PHP code from the user, right? It lives and executes on the server, but it doesn't get sent to the browser. So if we have things like logins or other sensitive code, our users can't see it because that code just lives on the server. So that's why it's important. Now PHP Storm actually comes with its own little built-in server as well. So I don't have to have Zamp. Notice it gives me this if I want to, let's say I want to run this in Chrome. It actually tries to run it on a different port, but it's not actually configured properly. So it's simpler to install Zamp. and we'll use Zamp as our local server. So my file's running locally. The last thing I want to show you for today, and I'll show you where the instructions are on Blackboard in case your computer's not totally configured for this, is how do we now put this online? In your class with Julie, did you put your web applications on a server? Which server did you use? Okay, so if you have an Azure account, that's great. You'll need it in January for our ASP.NET class. Azure will support, PHP runs on anything. So if you know how to connect to Azure and deploy your stuff to Azure, no problem. You can use Azure for this class. You don't have to use your AWS account. You can use, we've given you access to 2 different cloud services. You want to use Azure? Great. You want to use AWS? Great. So I'm going to show you how to use AWS. It's pretty simple. And then we'll wrap up for the day in a minute. So I put the instructions for using AWS in here in this links. So you probably have FileZilla on your computer already, I assume, from Julie's class. So same process. So all you need to do is look for AWS in your email. It might be in your junk email. And if you don't have an email, so Ian sets up all our AWS accounts, and I gave him our class list last week with everyone's names and student numbers. So he ran a script that should have sent everybody the credentials for their AWS account. So if you don't have an AWS account, but you use Azure, fine, no problem, you can just use Azure. If you want AWS and you don't have an account, please email me and I'll make sure Ian sets one up for you. But again, you can use either one, doesn't matter. So I'll just open up FileZilla and I'll show you where we access it. So in the site manager, I've created a new site. So here's the host. The host is simple. AWS.computerstudies, same host for all of us. Your username is GC and your student number, and the password is in your email. So you just add that in, and I'll connect. You're going to get this warning because our certificate expired. We're going to renew it, so this warning will go away shortly. So just click OK. It's fine. There's an SSL certificate. It's expired. We just have to renew it. So we have this public HTML folder. Here's my local folder. So here's my file I created for today. So I'm just going to make a directory here. I'll call it lesson 1. And I'll just put my PHP Info file here. So now I should be able to load it in my browser from AWS. How do I do that? I go to aws.computerstudies, and then the little tilde character at the top of your keyboard beside the 1, and then your username, GC, and your student number. That'll be easy enough to remember. And then I can go into lesson 1, and now my file's live on the internet. And because our AWS server can interpret PHP, and we've used the PHP extension, it shows us both our HTML as well as all the PHP info, except now it's about my AWS server, right? So we're getting different information. Here's my local version running on Windows, and here's my Linux version running on AWS. So in class, when we're working on the restaurant website, it's going to be much faster and easier just to work on our local server, which is why I want you to install it, just to save you time, so we're not transferring files up to the server all the time. But for your assignments, I want you to deploy them to AWS, to Azure, or to virtually any other web server you have access to will support PHP. So if sometimes students have their own servers, or they already have a hosting account with a cheap host like GoDaddy or HostGator, I don't care where your stuff is hosted. It doesn't matter, as long as it's available online so that I can mark it. So the instructions for AWS are here. I've kind of done a walkthrough using a different host, but it's the same process. But if everybody already knows how to post stuff online, that's great. As I said again, if you don't have an AWS account and you want one, check your email and let me know. Send me an email with your name and student number, and I'll make sure Ian sets it up. Otherwise, you're free to use Azure. So for next week, if you do not have a code editor set up, Visual Studio Code or PHP Storm, make sure you've set it up. Okay, make sure you can connect with FileZilla to Azure or AWS so you can upload your files. Okay, and next week we want to start building the restaurant site. So the first thing we'll do is we'll create a simple database, and then we'll start putting some restaurants in it so we can start working with that information. Okay, we'll hopefully be able to get started with GitHub next week. Okay, that's all for today. Have a great week. I'll see you next Thursday.